Hello everyone, my name is Morgan, and I also have an architectural background, and I'm doing a PhD with the Oslo School of Architecture and so on. I can't say I'm an artist myself, but I will be speaking about how citizens can engage with each other in online platforms that they can use to communicate with each other their ideas, and a little bit about how this started and where I'm working. I'm within a research team called Future North, and we're doing a mapping of cultural landscapes of the North, whatever that can mean officially, but we're working in Canada and Russia and Iceland and Greenland and so on. It's a mixed team. It's not just architects, but it's also literary scholars and social scientists who have different perspectives on how to see a landscape. And by landscape, it's quite broad how I mean that. A city could be a landscape, an ocean, a seaside, and it could be vast or small scales. And we go through fairly traditional ways of, interrogating the landscape, understanding it, walking through it, like the wonderful walk we did yesterday is one way of reading your spatial environment. And we've done a number of different ways of doing that through airplanes, and at the bottom there you see the flight path, which is quite significant considering the small place, just taking photographs and constantly looking at it that way, through the sea, by road, through maps, and also through workshops where we talk to citizens and we have interviews and so on. And where I'm working here is on the border with Russia and Norway, Nikel and Kirkenes. I'm not too sure how many of you have been up there. It's not too far from Murmansk. And so one could say that where I'm working is a periphery of sorts on the national scale. It's not very looked at, but for the people who live there and have lived there their whole lives, it's very central, obviously, because their everyday life takes place in this space. And so even though the majority of the people in the country might not know or think about it, what happens every day is really, really integral to their lives. And so the built environment will reflect their realities, as well as how we, as visitors, see it through different eyes. So we can pick up on things that people who see things every day don't typically see. And here are the communities from Satellite, Vardar, Kirkenes, and Nikel. And before I show you the online platforms, I'll show you some images just of the cities to show the character that can emerge through things like walks. This is Kirkenes, which has a crab fishery, a port that has a lot of Russian ships, and Nikel on the other side. And you can even see that the cities themselves, their cultural and national histories is reflected in the architecture and the built environment on both sides, and there's a difference between the wooden framed houses of Norway and the block architecture on the other side. And Vardar is an interesting one because it's a city of decline. It used to have 10,000 people and it has about 2,000. And they had a festival called Coma Fest. So they used the arts to reinvigorate the buildings so that the buildings were awakening as if from a coma. And you can see possibly on the edge of the shore, eternal light. They invited international artists to come and create street art on all sorts of surfaces, and they worked with the owners of the land themselves directly, without really talking to the city official or administrations for this particular process. But there was so much enthusiasm for grasping onto something that could change or improve the quality of the community and give it a spirit, even though it's kind of been in decline. So to go into the media, online media or locative media where you can locate yourself through GPS coordinates or mapping. It came from an idea from my city, which is a collective from Murmansk, and they had this idea from one of the workshops that a student from APO, the Oslo School of Architecture, had. Jan, up there in the corner, he put up a map and invited the community to put their ideas for improvement onto the map. And it was left there for about half a year before Stepa saw it. But he had noticed that over time, the map drew a lot of attention because it was a point of departure for people to reference their space and the ideas that were coming out of it, and a great point of discussion. But if you don't go to a workshop or a seminar like this, how do you continue that discussion, and can these ideas be archived in a way that's accessible to everybody? And so my city guys, they basically took that map and put it online, and it began populating with points which people could vote on. And the more popular an idea got, the bigger its circle got, and it changed color. And you can share the idea with Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And you can offer suggestions. There's like, yes, it's a good idea, but there's no, oh, that's a terrible idea, because we want to encourage positivity. And if you do think that some idea is not good, then you give a constructive alternative as opposed to having a series of downvotes. And it's been since taken up in some other Russian cities. And what I think is very interesting is that the spaces that people use and talk about you can kind of reveal the forms of the city, even though you can't see the city itself right here, which places generate a lot of interest, what a lot of people want to talk about. And so the voices that come from the people, you can actually see the city, its major gathering places and points of view. And then on the edges, of course, too, you see ideas. And in Tromsø, in Norway, the city administration actually took it themselves, opened it to the public, and had a feedback session so that they could incorporate it into their town planning process. And in this way, more people are encouraged to engage because they know that the city is going to act upon their ideas or vote upon them. And at the border zone, it's a bit more of a pilot project because, it's part of a research program and there's a smaller population of cities, but nonetheless, the ideas that come out start revealing the character of the city, which could be used by a number of people depending on what their interest is. So city administration might like ideas that are more of the infrastructure and how that can develop. Some of the ideas I find on the Norwegian side, but not on the Russian side, were aimed towards small businesses. This is a good place to open a cafe, or this is a good place to open a store here. But more on the Russian side, but also on both, were the civic improvement in terms of infrastructure, in terms of parks and public spaces, but also in local stories, cultural stories, and how those could be brought to life. And there's also this one that's specific to the arts, which we're talking about arts for the city, that uses the application for people to plot out where monumental art, civic ideas, like citizen ideas, also experienced artist ideas to come together as in this festival. There might be people here who know more about this project. I know it only through this layer, but if you do know more, please share in the discussion. So here you can see it's the same idea, but this is a particular layer focused on the arts. I can't read that, but
actually, it's this an idea of a monument to a can of conserved liver of cod, of Murmansk cod.
So, which is interesting, that's the most popular idea so far, right? But this, I think, is new, it's like 4 ideas. But that does reveal, like, I guess, the fishing characteristic of Murmansk and as I'm saying, the narrative of a city, so maybe that's very important. And I think what's really important is that these tools are, they're really great to serve as an online, like, repository or archive of ideas, maybe to link people together. But what I think is crucial is that in order to use the tools for you, to use them also with the traditional workshop, people-to-people thing. So you have this online stuff where you can put your ideas there and they're there, but like the talking we are in person with each other is also a really, really important aspect, if not most important. And then this just last slide here is when people are looking and going about the city, and you can't really see that very well, but the ideas pertain to spaces that there might be some confusion as to who is in charge of administering that space. Who can make a difference? Is it public? Does it belong to something that a city official is in charge of? Or is it a company? Or is it a private residence? And if we go back to, this is the last slide, to Varda, you see that it was the collection of citizens who lived there and their properties and their engagement with the artists that actually ended up transforming what was happening in their town, and that was actually little to do with what the city administration had to do. So there's different ways of engaging the space, different actors who are in charge of it, and with events like this and with the online platforms, you can communicate with other people and possibly create change in a number of different directions or under different authorities. Maybe some do-it-yourself urbanism or tactical urbanism, as they say. So yeah, that's all in there. Thank you very much for having me, and